Hi, everybody. This is Marlene with Eerie News, and today is October 20th, 2024, Sunday, October 20th, 2024. And I will give you fair warning today. I am taping this in the middle of the day, and I have several animals, that most of them exotic. So, again, if you hear some weird noise in the background, it's probably one of them. But let's go off to our first story. This is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories and is titled The Ripper's Mystery Letter. Not only was the identity of Jack the Ripper a mystery, but also, indeed, he was the author of several letters received by the police after the murders. A forensic linguist from the University of Manchester has found part of the answer. A forensic linguist from the University of Manchester who analyzed letters supposedly signed by Jack the Ripper has concluded that two of the most famous examples were written by the same person. Following the murders, police and newspapers were sent more than 200 letters supposedly from the Ripper, and which magnified his notoriety. There is a theory that some of the letters were written by reporters in order to increase the circulation of their respective newspapers. Most that were signed Jack the Ripper were and are still regarded as hoaxes. The impetus for the numerous letters was when the police decided to publish four of the letters which had been received thus far. Dr. Andrea Nini, a forensic linguist with the University of Manchester, examined two of the earlier letters, the Dear Boss letter and the Saucy Jack postcard. He said, quote, I came across the Jack the Ripper letters a few years ago, and I was surprised to know that there had not been any forensic analysts of them. So I thought that I could apply modern forensic linguistic techniques to uncover evidence about their author. My conclusion is that there's a very strong linguistic evidence that these two texts were written by the same person. People in the past had already expressed this tentative conclusion on the basis of similarity of handwriting, but this had not been established with certainty. I also found evidence that could link the author of these two letters to the so-called Moab and Midian letter, which some people believe was a hoax created by the Central News Agency of London. End quote. Jack the Ripper wasn't always known as Jack the Ripper. Prior to the death of Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes, who were both killed on September 30th, 1888, he was called the Red Fiend, the Whitechapel Murderer, and Leather Apron. He named himself in a letter sent to the Central News Agency as Jack the Ripper 3 days prior to the slaughter of Stride and Eddowes. The newspaper ignored the letter and sent it to the police on September 29th. Addressed to the Boss Central News Office, London City, it read, quote, Dear Boss, I keep on hearing the police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. That joke about Leather Apron gave me real fits. I'm down on horse, and I shan't quit ripping them till I do get buckled. Grand work the last job was. I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. You will soon hear of me with my funny little games. I saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope, ha. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears off and send to the police officers just for jolly, wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work, then give it out straight. My knife's so nice and sharp, I want to get to work right away if I get a chance. Good luck, yours truly, Jack the Ripper. Don't mind me giving the trade name. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands, curse it. No luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now, ha. End quote. The police believed the letter to be a hoax, but within 24 hours, two more prostitutes were killed. This is when they decided to actually consider the letter to be authentic, especially since Catherine Eddowes' earlobes were mutilated, as he had specified in the letter. Desperate for a lead, on October 1st, the police made the letter public. That same day, a postcard written in a similar handwriting was addressed the same as the letter. The scrawl was in red ink, and it appeared to have bloodstains on it. The postcard read, quote, I was not conning, dear old boss, when I gave you the tip. You'll hear about Saucy Jackie's work tomorrow. Double event this time. Number one squealed a bit. Couldn't finish straight off. Had not the time to get ears for police. Thanks for keeping last letter back till I got to work again. Jack the Ripper. End quote. The postcard references the two murders and the attempt of mutilating the victim's ears. Publishing the letters caused hoaxers to swamp police with bogus ones. Manpower was spent assessing each letter, trying to determine if it was authentic and then trace the writer. The fact that the author of the letter and the postcard sent them to a news agency versus a newspaper indicated he was familiar with the working of the press. On October 16, 1888, George Lusk, the president of the Mile End Vigilance Committee, received what is now the second most famous of all the letters from hell, which came with half of a preserved human kidney, purportedly taken from one of the victims. A common theme running through the Ripper letters was sending a body part to the police, and a missive sent to Lusk in mid-October made reference to cannibalism. Even though the 5 main murders attributed to Jack the Ripper occurred in 1888, police investigated 11 killings committed in Whitechapel and Spitalfields between 1888 and 1891. Mary Jane Kelly was the last one of what are considered the Canonical 5, or authenticated victims done in by Saucy Jack. The belief was that he stopped because he died, went to prison or an asylum, or left the country. However, there were 4 other women murdered afterward that some argue were Ripper victims as well. They are Rose Millette, Alice Mackenzie, the Pinchin Street Torso, and Frances Cole. The murders were committed during a time when immigrants from Ireland and Jews fleeing from Eastern Europe overcrowded the East End of London. The parish of Whitechapel had swelled to 80,000 inhabitants by 1888. Due to poverty, many women were forced into prostitution, and there were over 60 brothels and 1,200 women who sustained themselves this way. The crime strengthened the public belief that Whitechapel was a den of immorality and decay. A decomposing torso was discovered at Pinchin Street, Whitechapel, beneath a railway arch in September 1889. The woman, which has never been identified, was estimated to be between the age of 30 to 40 and had bruising on her back and arms, indicating she had been beaten shortly before being killed. Not only was she decapitated, but her legs were sawed off. Her abdomen was mutilated, but her genitals were not cut. It was estimated she was killed a day prior to the discovery somewhere else, and the torso was taken to the railway and hidden under an old chemise. The missing parts were never found. This murder was tied into another crime which predated the Ripper murders. Between May and June 1887, parts of a woman's body was found in the Thames near Rainham. First a bundle with the torso was discovered, then through May and June the other body parts. The head and upper chest were never found. Investigators concluded she had not been dissected by a medical student, but that a knowledge of anatomy was evident in the way she had been cut up. Between September and October 1888, parts of a woman's body were found at 3 different locations in the center of the city, including what would become the future police headquarters known as Scotland Yard. This would be dubbed the Whitehall Mystery. The headless torso was found in the basement of the new Metropolitan Police Headquarters, still under construction in Whitehall. The shoulder and arm had been found floating in the Thames near Pimlico on September 11th, almost a month before. The left leg was buried near where the torso was found, and unearthed on October 17. As the parts were found, they were matched by a police surgeon as belonging to the same victim. The rest of the victim was never found, nor was she identified. The mutilations were similar to the victims found on Pinchin Street. A female torso was found in the Thames on June 4, 1889. The following week, other parts were found in the river. 11 body parts were discovered in different places, and again it was concluded the person who committed the crime had medical knowledge. The woman was 8 months pregnant. The head was never found, but she was identified as Elizabeth Jackson, a homeless prostitute from Chelsea. There were other cases in which it was debated whether they were the handiwork of the same person. The following murders all predated the Whitechapel killings. In September 1873, 15 years before the Ripper murders, the left quarter of a woman's trunk was found near Battersea. 4 other body parts were found on the following day. The nose and the chin were cut from the face, and the head had been scalped. The police surgeon reconstructed the corpse, and it was reported she had been cut up dexterously and not hacked. A reward for £200 was offered, but the case remained unsolved. In June 1874, a woman's dismembered body was found in the Thames at Putney. The torso only had one leg attached. The police surgeon stated the body had been cut at the spinal cord, then was treated with lime before being dumped into the river. The case, like the others, remained unsolved. In October 1884, there was another case related to the discovery of human remains near Tottenham Court Road and Bedford Square. A skull with flesh still adhering to it, as well as a large piece of flesh from the thigh bone, was discovered. Then a woman's arm was thrown over the railing with a tattoo on it, indicating she was a prostitute. Then 5 days later, a torso was found at Fitzroy Square. An inquest was held in December, which showed the body was skillfully dissected. It was reported in the Pall Mall Gazette. The sidewalk in front of the house is constantly patrolled by police. It is believed that the parcel was deposited between 10 o'clock and 10:15 when the police relief takes place." End quote. The place was in front of a military drill hall and armory. Undoubtedly, the perpetrator was familiar with police schedules and wanted to have the parcel found. At the inquest, it was concluded the parts belonged to the same woman. Another parcel was found in the Mornington Crescent enclosure on December 9th, 1884, which consisted of the right arm, a right and left foot, and right forearm, which were inspected by a division surgeon who concluded the body had been skillfully dissected and were from a different person than the one found at Tottenham Court. The murders remained unsolved. The bodies found in Whitehall and Pinchin Street became known as the Thames Mystery and were attributed to the torso killer. Was he also Jack the Ripper? Some argue they had different MOs, and police discounted they were the same person. It was inevitable that any murders with the evidence of mutilation were compared to the Ripper murders. On December 29th, 1888, the body of John Gill, age 7, was found in a stable block in Manningham, Bedford. He had been missing for 2 days. His legs were cut off, his abdomen slit open, and his intestines were pulled out. His heart and ears were removed. The similarity to the Ripper murders was not missed. William Barrett, 23, who employed him, was arrested twice for the crime, but was released due to insufficient evidence, and no other person was prosecuted. Even the murder of Carrie Shakespeare Brown in April 24, 1891 in New York City was examined as a possible Ripper victim. Known for quoting Shakespeare, she was strangled with a piece of clothing and mutilated with a knife. She had cuts on her legs and back and a large incision in her groin area. One of her ovaries was found on the bed. The Metropolitan Police believed this was not a Ripper case. Despite the belief the Ripper murders were not a common occurrence, there were several murders where the victims were dismembered, however not as frequently as the years surrounding the Thames Embankment murders. The murders that were dubbed the torso mysteries of 1873 and 1874 were the most similar. Was this the handiwork of the same person? Was a perpetrator incarcerated or institutionalized around 1874 and then later released to continue in his murderous urges? The waters of the Thames has not only welcomed murder victims but suicides and those who were just unlucky. In 1882, there were 544 corpses found in the river, and 277 remained with open verdicts. The newspapers of the day noted that the Thames afforded the perpetration of secret murders. The criminals understood what the surgeons did as well, which was that once the body was recovered from water, it made identification of the body and cause of death much more difficult to prove. There were other killings that were examined to determine if they were Ripper murders. One case, known as Fairy Faye, involved a report that the body of a woman was found in a doorway close to Commercial Road the day after Christmas 1887. She had a stake driven through her abdomen. It's believed this report of Fairy Faye never existed and was based on the murder of Emma Elizabeth Smith, who had a stick or other object shoved into her vagina. On February 25, 1888, Annie Millwood, 38, came to the Whitechapel Workhouse Infirmary with stab wounds to her legs and lower torso. She told the staff she was attacked by a stranger wielding a clasp knife. She was treated and discharged but died a month later from natural causes. Was this the Ripper's first murder? A suspect that was looked at during modern times was the artist Walter Sickert. He took an interest in the crimes of Jack the Ripper and believed he had stayed in a room used by the killer. His landlady told him she suspected a previous lodger who stayed there in 1881 was the Ripper. The artist made a painting of the room in 1905-1907 and titled it Jack the Ripper's Bedroom. And I'm enlarging it for those of you who are watching the video version of this. This is what he painted. During the 1970s, he was considered as possibly being Jack the Ripper or his accomplice. Many dispute this theory since he spent the majority of 1888 outside of England and was in France during the time of the Whitechapel murders. Most of the police files relating to the investigation of these murders were lost during the Blitz. The files that were not destroyed describe where police went house to house throughout Whitechapel searching for clues or witnesses. Animal slaughterers, butchers, doctors, and surgeons came under special scrutiny due to the mutilation committed on the bodies. Over 75 butchers and slaughterers, along with their employees for the past 6 months, were questioned. After the murder of Stryden Eddowes, the police commissioner offered a reward of £500 for the arrest of the perpetrator. This would be equivalent to over £15,000 present day. In October 1888, police surgeon Bond offered what is considered an early offender profile. He had examined the Ripper's victims along with post-mortem notes. He wrote, quote, "All 5 murders no doubt were committed by the same hand. In the first 4, the throats appeared to have been cut from left to right. In the last case, owing to the extensive mutilation, it is impossible to say in what direction the fatal cut was made, but arterial blood was found on the wall in splashes close to where the woman's head must have been lying. All the circumstances surrounding the murders lead me to form the opinion that the women must have been lying down when murdered, and in every case the throat was first cut." End quote. Bond did not believe the killer had any special knowledge of anatomy, even as a butcher. He believed the suspect was a solitary individual who had bouts of homicidal and erotic mania, and his hypersexuality was expressed through the mutilation inflicted on the women. There was no evidence of sexual assault on the victims, but psychologists see the penetration of the knife and leaving the victims in sexually degrading positions with the wounds exposed, which indicated he found sexual satisfaction from the acts. Authorities also looked at the timing of the crimes in an effort to identify the perpetrator. The killings occurred around weekends and public holidays. The crime scenes were close to each other. Some believe this indicated the Ripper was employed and lived locally. Others believe the killer was an educated man, like a physician or an aristocrat, who traveled into Whitechapel to commit the murders. These theories were based on fear of science and the medical profession and exploitation of the poor by the wealthy. Over 100 men were named as suspects by different sources, some of them years after the Ripper murders. But in the end, Red Jack's identity remains a mystery. In 2022, Jack the Ripper's only known facial composite was found at Archives. The image was etched into the handle of a wooden walking stick, which was owned by Scotland Yard detective Frederick Aberline, who was removed from the case in 1889. The cane was gifted to Aberline after he was taken off the case. He retired in 1892 after 30 years as a detective and died in 1929, without apprehending the Ripper or knowing who he was. The cane was stored at the Police College in Bramhill, Hampshire, which was shut down in 2015. One of the suspects, believed by many to be Jack the Ripper, was named Aaron Kosminski. He was a Polish-Jewish barber who worked in Whitechapel where the murders took place. He was admitted to a mental institution in the early 1890s, shortly after the Whitechapel murders. He died in 1919 at age 53. In February 2024, an AI generated image was made of what Kosminski looked like. Jeff Leahy, a Ripper enthusiast, used Midjourney software to create the image. He used two pictures of Kosminski's sister, Matilda, one of his uncle, and another of a close relative. He had a picture of his brother-in-law, which proved useful since the families were closely related since cousins would marry for generations. And for those of you watching the video version, this is what, according to that AI generated image, gave of what Kosminski looked like based on the pictures of all his relatives, including his brother-in-law, because, like he said, they were related, in other words. But again, maybe he was. Maybe this might be Jack the Ripper or not. Maybe he was just a disturbed man. And again, a lot of people, and I didn't know it till I started looking at this, that there were so many murders where women were being basically dismembered. Because everybody thinks of the Jack the Ripper murders as these extreme examples, not only of murder, but of dismemberment. But even 15 years prior, there were women being hacked to death. Some that were never identified because, and again, back in those times, mostly people were identified. Remember, even back then, fingerprints were not that was the face. So, so if you think, okay, well, they decapitated them and they got rid of the head, just so that it would head, hands, and that's it. But these murders, they were going for beyond the I'm going to get rid of the head so that this victim can't be identified. They were mutilating the body, which obviously shows a lot of mental derangement. So there you go. And Saucy Jack turned out to be very saucy after all, because nobody's been able to figure out who he was. For sure, that is. Okay, next story is out of Stranger Than Fiction Stories, and it's titled The Santos Malandros, Venezuela's Holy Thugs Cult. Let's see. Caracas has become the murder capital of the world. In the heart of this city, where poverty and violence are experienced by those living there on a daily basis, is a shrine. The altar is not populated by recognized religious statues, but by colorful cap-wearing images with brightly colored trousers and cigarettes hanging from their mouths. It is to these dead gangsters that the desperate come to pray for protection. The most widespread religion in Venezuela is Christianity, but the poor and vulnerable come to pray in a shrine in the heart of Caracas. It is located in Cementerio General del Sur, which dates back to 1876. It is surrounded by slums perched on hillsides overlooking the roughest part of the city. Inside this place are not statues of saints, but men dressed in colorful modern clothing, sideways baseball caps, guns stuck in their belts, and a cigarette hanging from their mouth. These are statues of thugs and criminals long dead. It is said they are all the malandros. Statues of thugs and criminals long dead. It is said all the malandros are buried in this graveyard. Malandros is a Venezuelan slang for delinquents of various trades, and en malandreo is a Venezuelan gangster identity. The Santos Malandros, or Holy Thugs, became prominent in the city of Caracas in 1989 after the 3-day riots that tore the city apart and was known as the Caracazo. Cesar Chavez took over the government in 1999, and murder and violence has been on the rise since then, escalating to an all-time since the ascension of Maduro's communist regime. The most recent number estimate 111.2 murders per 100,000 residents, making it the second most violent city in South America and the Caribbean, right behind Los Cabos, Mexico. It's believed the estimate is not really accurate, but much higher. But due to the mass exodus from Venezuela, the country's population is continuously shifting. The government does not release official data, and local media hasn't been providing full reports, making it a nation that has become incapable of counting its dead. It is this violence that drives devotion to the Malandro Court, also known as the Cali Court, which encompasses a pantheon of criminals. The most popular of the Santos Malandros is Ismael Sanchez. Excuse me. It is said that Ismael was stabbed to death by the criminal Leo in the 23rd de enero or 23 de enero parish. Another version says that it was in a confrontation with the PTJ, Chino Jimenez, on the old road to La Guaira, PTJ, I believe, is the police there. A year after his death, he supposedly appeared in body and soul to an elderly lady who suffered from cancer, and after that, she was miraculously cured of her illness. Since then, Ismail became a spiritual myth. That's interesting. From thug to spiritual myth. Let's keep going. Ironically, it seems that Ismail was an unrepentant criminal in life. And though he robbed the populace, his followers say he was more of a Creole Robin Hood thug, who never stole anything unless it was for the neighborhood so everybody could eat. Stuck in purgatory, he is seeking redemption, justice, and a place in heaven by helping those in need. A few graves away from this place are the graves of Freddy Jose Saavedra, El Pavo Freddy, born in 1955 and died in 1982, and Elizabeth Castillo Cortecale is indicated by a book-shaped plaque and another flat one that is like a ceramic mosaic. Some of the other thugs are Malandro Miguelito Pelón, Chama Isabelita, which is Ismail's girlfriend, Freddy Raton, and Petroleo Crudo, among others. Worship at the shrine starts with an offering, which can range from flowers, drugs, and the favorite, which is cigarettes or tobacco. To make sure your prayer is taken into consideration, you should light the cigarette and place it in the mouth of one of the statues. The shrine is located at the supposed grave of Ismael Sanchez, even though it is believed this is not the exact location. It sits behind one of the most visited graves, that of Maria Francia, who favors students, as she was one when she met her death after being bitten by a snake. Other petitioners come to the Cali court asking not to be mugged on the street, women wanting protection from an abusive partner, and cops who seek protection in their jobs. In this city of the dead, there is more than one grave with offerings, and supplicants desperate for help in the most desperate of times and places. Esoteric stores sell busts or statues of the cult such as La Chama Isabel, El Chino, Petroleo Crudo, Felix Azuaje, La Cleo, Rigoberto Martinez, Luis Antonio Miguelito, and Muelita. There are elements of santeria in the practice. Visitors come dressed all in white with offerings in hand. The Malandros, though, also carry negative consequences, since at times they will possess one of their supplicants who has mediumistic abilities, and they will ask for drugs, firearms, and alcohol, which they experience to the bodies of the humans they have mounted. The Malandros are part of the Maria Leonza cult, which believes the dead coexist with the living and channeling them as part of their practices. The cult incorporates saints who reflect the country's situation. Devotees come asking for protection from crime, but criminals come for aid to carry out their illegal activities. It's understood the Malandros can help you, but they can also turn against you. Spiritualists, priests, or brujos act as channelers to pass on messages from the thugs. The popularity of this group could be attributed to society in Venezuela, where crime has grown disproportionately and in which deceased criminals are venerated. Yes. All right. Next story is out of MSN. This is through Business Insider, really. It's titled Archaeologists Found Viking Skeletons Over 1,000 Years Old Buried with a Crystal and Other Treasures. They're improving our understanding of how wealthy Vikings once lived. Near the village of Asum in Denmark, people have been finding bits of metals from the Iron Age for years. They had no idea they were standing on the well-preserved graves of 15 Viking-era skeletons. Archaeologists happened upon the graves during a routine survey last year in preparation for a construction project. Normally we would be lucky to find a few teeth in the graves, but here we have entire skeletons. Michael Bore Lundo, who has led the excavation for the last 6 months, said, Bore Lundo and his colleagues at the Museum Odense have dated the burial site back to the 9th or 10th century, more than 1,000 years ago. In addition to the skeletons, the archaeologists have uncovered rare trinkets and treasures buried with the bodies that help shine a light on their lives and socio-economic status. For example, some of the jewelry did not originate in Denmark. As we suspected, the graves tells the story of people connected to the international trade routes. Borelundo told Business Insider These routes open new avenues for exchanging goods, allowing the wealthy to acquire rare and prized items from other communities in distant lands and helped establish nearby Odense, the third largest city in Denmark. Okay, And again, I think they're realizing that all these old cultures that for some reason, when I say eight, 1,000 or older, sometimes even BC, I think sometimes archaeologists have put these people like being very, how can I say, confined to the area where they lived at because they thought they were incapable or didn't have the means of traveling. And I mean, Vikings are well known for being maritime experts, but there were other overland routes. What I'm saying is that even though this was before the division of countries, etc., people were people of different cultures and different locations. If they weren't plundering each other, were basically trading. They were trading, which gives a whole different idea that a lot of these communities were not as insular as a lot of people think. All right, so oh, I think there's a lot about the ancient world that I think there's more to come to light than what we've been exposed to so far. Okay, back to stranger than fiction stories. This is titled The Singing Strangler. Within the span of only a few weeks, 3 women were killed in Melbourne, Australia. World War II raged in Europe, and police were at a loss as to who was committing the crimes. Edward Joseph Leonsky was born December 12, 1917, at Kenville, New Jersey. He was the sixth child of Russian-born parents John Leonsky, laborer, and his wife Amelia Nee Harkovitz. There was abuse and alcoholism in the household. The family moved to East 77th Street, New York, during Edward's infancy. Leaving junior high school in 1933, he took a secretarial course and finished in the top 10% of his class. He held several clerical jobs before working for Gristed Brothers Inc. Superior Food Markets. He was drafted, and when he shipped out on his military tour on February 17, 1941, he left behind an unhappy family, a mother mentally unstable, 2 brothers with prison records, and a third in a psychiatric hospital. Chances are that by the time the 23-year-old was stationed with the 52nd Signal Battalion in San Antonio, Texas, he was already overindulging in alcohol. His favorite drink was a whiskey laced with hot peppers. He was known to walk on his hands along the bar counter to call attention to himself. Around this time, he tried to strangle a woman, but somehow he evaded repercussions. His unit was shipped off to Australia, and he arrived in January 1942. Leonsky was quartered at Camp Pell, and his heavy drinking continued. There was another incident where he tried to rape a woman in her St. Kilda flat. This time he spent 30 days in the stockade. On May 3rd, Ivy Violet McLeod, she was also known by Ivy as Ivy Dargavel, 40, was found nearly nude and dead in the doorway of a shop next to the Bleak House Hotel, Albert Park. The huddled body only had shreds left of her clothing. She had severe bruising on the head and lower portion of her body, and blood was oozing from her mouth. Later examination of the body found her skull was fractured. She worked as a hostess at the Wentworth Cafe. Ivy was last seen leaving a tavern. Later, a man told police she had spent the night with him until 2 a.m., then left to go home. The newspapers called it the brownout crime, since street lighting had been reduced due to the war. She had been beaten and strangled, but her purse had not been taken, ruling out robbery as a motive. 6 days later, Pauline Buchan Thompson was found dead outside a city boarding house after she spent the night out. She was the wife of Constable Les, a Bendigo policeman, and a former radio announcer who used the name of Coral. Like Ivy McLeod, her clothes had been ripped and all of it bunched around her waist. There was obvious signs of strangulation on the body. A witness later described a disheveled American man asking him directions. He was out of breath and covered in mud. This matched the description of a man Pauline was last keeping company with. On May 18th, Gladys Hosking, 40, was killed while walking late at night in the Royal Park near Melbourne University. Her clothing was also ripped and bunched around her waist. All 3 were strangled, and though their genitals were exposed, none were sexually assaulted. A 4th woman was attacked, but when she threatened to call the police, the attacker fled. While searching for what was described as a sex maniac, even though the newspapers would never disclose if any of the women were raped or not, a criminologist said that all the slayings were of a sex and sadist type, probably committed by one man of a sort whose overwhelming desires at intervals could be satisfied only by a cruel killing. Other attacks described the same man, which was a young American. An Australian sentry reported a GI in bloodstained clothing on May 28th, and suspicion focused on servicemen. During a troop inspection in Melbourne, the sentry picked Leonsky from the assembled men. Two of the women he had attacked and who escaped also said this was the man who tried to strangle them. He was questioned and made a full confession, admitting to a fascination with the female voice. He explained, "That's why I choked those ladies. It was to get their voices." Turned out that Pauline Thompson had sung for Leonsky on the night he killed her. The newspaper dubbed him the Singing Strangler. During the trial, a psychiatrist testified that Leonsky was sane, but under the influence of alcohol, he would have continued killing women. The public learned that Leonsky's father was an alcoholic, and his mother and brother were confined in the same asylum. It was noted that he always mixed his drinks, even putting in ketchup, mustard, pepper, salt, and ice cream with his whiskey and beer. Despite confessing to the murders, Leonsky pled not guilty by reason of insanity. However, the United States Army court-martial on July 17, 1942 convicted him and sentenced him to death. A board of review upheld the finding, and he was scheduled for execution on November 1st, 1942. It was noted that during his trial, incarceration, and up to that date of his execution, he seemed nonchalant and unaffected that he would be hanged for his crimes. Leonsky was a self-described Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, which demonstrates he had some type of self-awareness of his actions. The prisoner was kept at the city watch house and even started a correspondence with a woman living at Eltham. Though he was Jewish, he turned to the Catholic Church during his incarceration. On November 4th, 1942, General MacArthur personally signed the execution order, and he was hanged at Pentridge Prison on November 9th. Ira C. Rothgerber, as Leonsky's attorney, attempted to win an external review even from the U.S. Supreme Court, but was unable to do so. Leonsky was the second American serviceman to be executed during World War II. Over a 3-year period from 1942 to 1945, the United States Army executed 141 men for murder and or rape charges. Initially buried in Australia, he ended up being dug up twice and ultimately buried in Section 9, Row B, Site 8 at Schofield Barracks Post Cemetery in Honolulu, Hawaii, in a portion of the facility reserved for general prisoners who had died in military custody. Let me tell you something, the Army wasn't kidding. 141 men hung in a 3-year period. Boy, they were not fooling. They were not fooling around, but that's wartime. And again, if you were a soldier, you were under the jurisdiction of, the military. And what I think is, they never explore it, but I wonder, this gentleman, this boy, well, he wasn't a boy, what am I talking about? He went into the Army prior to Pearl Harbor. He wasn't drafted. He went in there like almost a year before Pearl Harbor. And I wonder if the reason why, besides having a very, very dysfunctional family life, was that he had done something at where he lived at. All right. Had he, he was living, he was in New York. I wonder how many rapes, attempted rapes, or even murder, strangulations. And at some point he realized, I need to get out of town. And he went into the armed forces. And again, it was very strange when you look at this. There was the way they covered it, and I almost want to say that the newspapers, for some strange reason, were trying to, how can I say, omit that these women had been raped. Because they wouldn't say one way or another. They wouldn't conclude it. And I almost want to say, for lack of a better word, they were trying to save, like, the ultimate assault would have been that they were raped. But I have a feeling, considering that he had attacked other women and that their clothing was disarranged, I have a feeling that he did rape them, and that they just omitted it from the newspapers. But then again, yes, I have this feeling that Mr. Leonsky, if one ever did a search as to right around maybe at least a year before he left, he there was probably some attacks that never went anywhere, and because he just left town. So there you go. There's some eerie news for you. I will be back soon with some more of the good stuff. And until next time, take care.